Okay, well, welcome everyone to our first time home buyer seminar. Thanks for being with us. We have Michel Nungisa here from Nungisa Law, who's going to be co-presenting with me today. Michel, did you want to give a little bit introduction of yourself to our audience?
Absolutely. So good evening, everyone. My name is Michel Nungisa. I'm the lead counsel at Nungisa Law. I've been a lawyer since 2013 and started my own firm in 2020, just in the midst of the pandemic. And it's been a very pleasant, fun ride, full of bumps and good experiences and good encounters, including Ericka here, which we had a deal together, and since our path crossed, we've been in contact and had the good idea to put together this presentation, this seminar. So we're really happy to have you here and looking forward to being with you this evening.
Thank you so much. So today, some of the things that we're going to be talking about, we've had a little introduction to, I'll give an introduction to myself as well. We're going to talk a little bit about residential real estate and the process for purchasing, what it is to work with your mortgage broker, as well as with your solicitor and your solicitor's role. Why it's important to work with a mortgage broker and why it's involved in your approval, the importance of your solicitor and how it is that they help you during the real estate transaction. We're going to have time to talk a little bit about current real estate topics and frequently asked questions, and then we will have time for questions as well. So encourage all of you who are participating today, feel free to put your questions in the chat box, and we'll make sure to get to everything at the end. We have, a variety of people here from different professions, including other mortgage brokers and real estate professionals. So I think we'll have maybe some timely conversations about what's going on in the real estate world currently. So maybe I'll hand it over to Michel
Sure.
to talk a little bit about the real estate process.
Sure. So I thought it might be a good idea to give the audience a background of what we do, the solicitor side of the real estate transaction. So I'm going to go through a deck that's been prepared. Okay, and it's going to be shared in a moment.
And I've just made you host.
Okay. All right, so I'm going to share my screen. And from the beginning. Is everyone able to see the screen?
It's just blank for me.
Yeah, not
It's
yet.
just blank? Okay, hang on. We'll do this.
Perfect. We can see it.
You're on mute, Michel.
Michel, we can't hear you. I need to unmute.
Do you guys hear me?
Now we can.
Okay, Ericka, why don't you share your screen and then you will take me through the slide deck. If we had elevator music, we would cue it in now, but we'll go easy on too many things going on at once. All right. Okay. So thank you, Ericka. You're wonderful. And I just wanted to give a bit of background about, so I said in the beginning, my name is Michel Nungisa and lead counsel at Nungisa Law. And I just wanted to speak about the tagline that we have for the law firm, which is faith in balance, because in one of the things that we wanted to talk about or highlight in this presentation is the importance of your solicitor. And the solicitor is a lawyer that is going to register your title and your mortgage. And it's so key and important for the client to have trust in such a person. And that's the essence of who we are and what we try to do is to establish, first of all, that relationship with the client so they can have trust in our advice, trust in what we bring to the table, to bring balance about the transaction that we're in. So hence the tagline, faith in balance. Okay, next slide, please. And again, this is just me again saying hi, nice to meet you. So we can go to the next slide. Today we're going to talk about the legal aspect of your real estate transaction. And if you look from a chronological standpoint, the lawyer intervenes at the very end of the process. So you would have hopefully secured an approval, signed an agreement of purchase and sale, and then once the instructions to the file are available, then your lawyer would intervene. So we'll start from the end in this for the purpose of this seminar, and then after that, Ericka will jump in and talk more about the mortgage aspect of the transaction. Next slide. Next slide again. And it starts by a congratulation. That's one of the nicest things that I like to do is congratulate the people that come to us and say, you're buying a house. The congratulation at the beginning, the congratulation at the end. It's all part of the process. And it's a congratulation because real estate, if you talk to any financial planner, is a way to be building generational wealth. It's a stepping stone to any financial asset that you're in. Again, it's one of the most important transactions that one can make. So congratulations if that's where you are. If not, then there's a lot of resources available to help you bring you up to a place where we can say congratulations to you for what you're about to embark. Okay, so next slide. And I've just sort of canvassed a checklist. It's not exhaustive, but it's a checklist of items from the legal side of the transactions that are important to keep in mind. Okay, sounds good. So all our files start with the file opening questionnaire, and it's a series of inquiries that we need to receive in order to open a file. We want your name, your address, occupation, etc., etc. If you're buying with a spouse, we need also their information, email address. And we're not just doing that because we want to store your data, but it's required by the Law Society of Ontario. So as lawyers, we have a duty to be able to identify the client, and that's done through the questionnaire and receiving 2 pieces of ID. And so the 2 pieces of ID also is required by the Law Society, front and back. A common element that we see is the health card, and the health card is not considered a good ID because it's only when it's in the context of a healthcare matter that you can present your health card to be identified. But for the purposes of ID for a real estate transaction, It's either, passport, driver's license, if you are a recent resident or newcomers, your PR card, and we need front and back. So and one thing that also we create some back and forth between our office and the clients is the resolution. And I know nowadays we have these fancy cameras that are high res, and that's absolutely what we need, because we need to be able to keep and store that data if we get audited, to say that we've identified the client properly. And as for any questionnaire, sometimes it's also the piece that takes the longest for us to receive. And so please, if you're a client and you're going to work with us or another lawyer, make sure that you're prompt in responding to the information that is sought from you. There's nothing more frustrating than to send out the questionnaire and then send a reminder after a reminder after a reminder to say, hey, I can't do anything if I don't have your information. And so just keep that in mind once you're going to be in that process. And then after that, the next point that we do as a law firm is to contact the other side. If we're representing the buyer, we would call the seller's lawyer just to introduce ourselves and say we're the lawyer on the file, just exchange of information, so that if ever there were to be a situation, the lawyers have connected. And it's also good to establish a rapport, because every transaction has its own quirks, but as lawyers exchange their information and introduce themselves, it also creates that climate amongst solicitors that know each other, and it's very cordial in that sense. If you're buying a new home, then we would also contact the builder's lawyer to advise them who are on the file. And then the next point would be to review your agreement of purchase and sale, also known as the APS. On some of your transaction, you will see that there's conditions. Your realtor may have added a condition that you have X amount of days to review the APS with the lawyer, to make sure everything that it contains is there. And so some realtor have that piece of information, some don't. But considering that it's a pretty important contract that you're signing, it's always advised and preferable to make sure that you understand, because these contracts are template, but there's always schedules that are attached that may contain conditions. I'll give you an example. There was one client that reached out to us, and as part of the Schedule B conditions, they wanted to make sure that they would obtain a certain zoning for the purpose of their purchase. And so they called us and say, is that a condition that you think will be fulfilled? And then it creates a conversation with the client and the realtor to understand why the condition and how can we assist to make sure the condition is fulfilled in due course. And of course, if there's any questions about the requisition date or any dates of importance in the APS, that's also something we review with the client. Next slide. Okay. Yeah, you can just click all three of them so that you won't have that issue. Oh, nope. We have to go back up. Okay. After we've, opened the file, connected with the solicitor, and reviewed the APS, the next step is to connect with your lender. So if you work with someone like Ericka that has a plethora of broker or lenders that she's working with, we would like to speak with her to understand where is the process in terms of approval. Is there a pre-approval? Is there a commitment that has been signed? These are all things that help us know if we need to bring forward certain matters or make sure that everything is in place for the firm to receive mortgage instructions, or if there's any issues regarding the conditions not being satisfied. And then oftentimes we just are like a gopher or a reminder to the client to make sure, have you completed every of your your lender's conditions, your broker's conditions? And that's also why we get to get in touch. We like to get in touch with the lender. And then we obtain the mortgage instructions. So mortgage instructions is a document that contains everything that the lender requires for the law firm to complete so that the file can be funded. And if you're a mortgage broker, this is the Bible that you work with, right? And so it contains your commitment, anything that has to do with privacy, anything that has to do with ID verification. There's also some statutory declaration that could be contained in there. Something like it needs to be owner occupied, or if you say that you're a first-time home buyer, maybe some lenders like to have that as a declaration. And it also contains your mortgage commitment. So that would be how much you're going to pay per month, your rate, is it variable, is it fixed? And because we work with different brokers and different brokers, everyone has their way of doing it. And it's not uncommon that when we meet with client, although they've been working with a broker, we still review everything with them. And so if you're a client and then you've signed the commitment, but you have questions, please ask them. Ask them from your broker, right? If there's something there's nothing more frustrating to see someone who signs something that they don't fully understand. And so I take it upon myself to ask the client first. So I know I've seen a commitment, but do you have any questions about what you've signed? And more often than not, they will say, yeah, actually, there's this point that I didn't understand. And that's something else, like a value added that we bring to the file, is that we review the entire commitment and all the mortgage instructions. And also pointing out things like the prepayment privilege, which is something that is often glossed over. And that's essentially how much you can prepay on top of your regular scheduled payment or a lump sum without penalty. So those are some of the items that you would see with your mortgage instructions. And then we get to the signing meeting. With the beauty of, COVID was hard for a lot of reasons, but it also opened a way of doing things virtually like we're doing right now. And I'd say probably 75% of the signing that we do are virtual, which is very comfortable with the client and makes things go faster. There's some lenders that won't accept virtual e-signatures. And so for that reason, we're also very mobile and we can meet with the client in their homes or a location of their preference. And then we review everything, we affix our autographs, and then everybody gets their paper. So the mortgage would get their instructions, the lawyer from the mortgage instructions signed, and then also every document that would go either to the seller's lawyer or the builder's lawyer will be sent off and be ready for the closing date. Another item that it's important to discuss with the client is closing funds. So you have the mortgage that's going to finance a transaction, but then you also have your down payment. It could go from as low as 5%, although I'm not sure if it's still in the current market something that is very available. And then Ericka might talk about that in her presentation. And you have 20%, up to 20%, even more. And then your other closing funds will include, so the balance for your mortgage, it's going to include the legal fees and disbursements. So everything that is the fees for the lawyer, and disbursements are all payments and expenses that were incurred by the law firm for the opening, carriage, and closing of your file. So for instance, once we receive the APS, one thing that we look at is we do a title search based on the requisition date. So every APS has a requisition date. It's on the second page of most agreements, and that's the date by which we, the lawyer for the buyer, have to send what we call requisition or questions to the other side to have answers about those questions. The most simplest one to think about is a requisition regarding the mortgage. So I'm buying a house and there's a mortgage on title. So I'm saying, based on our title search, there's an instrument A, B, C, D, E. It's a mortgage for TD with a prepay or a principal of $400,000 to pay. And our requisition is that on closing, first of all, you provide us with a discharge statement and you confirm that you undertake to discharge that mortgage, right? So then the other side's lawyer would respond by providing us the undertaking, that's the promise to do something, and a confirmation of the existence of a discharge statement. Because the last thing that you want as a lawyer for for the buyer is to convey title with an imperfect title, and a mortgage from the previous owner would be just that, right? It would be an imperfect title. And of course, land transfer tax. And that's a tax that is applicable to every transaction that is calculated by softwares that are, and there's a lot of tools online. Actually, if you just Google Ontario land transfer tax online, and then you punch in there the purchase price of the APS, it will automatically populate what is your land transfer tax payable. Now, as you may know, if you are a first-time home buyer, and probably you are if you're listening to this seminar, there's a rebate that's available for all first-time home buyers, and up to a maximum of $4,000. And so, but to qualify for that rebate, you need to be a first-time home buyer. What's a first-time home buyer? It's someone that has never owned property anywhere in the world. That's the definition in the Act. So if you have bought a property outside of Canada, you have to you don't qualify for that rebate. And that's why, as part of the documents that we sign in the signing meeting that we just saw before, if you're a first-time home buyer, we'll sign a declaration that say, my name is Ericka, I purchased this house on November 1st, 2022, the purchase price is X, and I declare that I am a first-time home buyer as per the definition contained in the Act, right? So that's one good thing to keep in mind, and there's a lot of tools available online to make that easy calculation. Okay, and then comes closing day. Closing day typically looks like a lot of stress for you because you're anxiously waiting, when is my lawyer calling me, right? And and so it essentially, by closing day, we've received the confirmation that the file is properly funded, solicitor complete, and that we're just going to receive a wire in our trust account so that we can make the payment, which is called the balance due on closing. And so once we receive the funds from your lender, we issue the balance due on closing to the seller's lawyer. Once they confirm receipt, that's when all the documents are signed electronically with a software called TerraView. That's in Ontario, land is conveyed electronically, as opposed to some other provinces where you have to go and register a paper application. So everything is registered electronically. Once we have, once the seller's lawyer is in receipt of the closing funds and the buyer's lawyer has registered your mortgage and your transfer, that's when the transaction officially closes and we're able to release to you the keys. During COVID, it was the practice that we've seen a lot is that realtor would put lockbox outside the homes, and so that once everything would close, then I would have that phone call to say, congratulations, your transaction at close. 1234 is the lockbox code. Go pick up your key, and thank you for allowing us to assist you in this transaction. So that's what, in a nutshell, the closing day looks like. If you click again, the title will appear. Yes, I want to spend some time to speak about home inspection. If you're aware how crazy the real estate market was in 2020 to 2022, this is probably one of the items that was the most often removed as a condition, so that people making a bid on a house would look more appealing to the seller, right? And I just wanted to go through some key points as to why it is my estimation that a home inspection is something you should never skip, unless you're buying from a new build or a builder. So unless you're buying a brand new house, basically, here's a few reasons why I would strongly recommend to not skip your home inspection. Number one is your safety, right? You want to make sure that the integrity of the house is not compromised. The last thing that you want is that you get into the house and you start, I don't know, you want to do renovation and then it's mold. or there's something affecting the structural integrity, or there's a crack in the foundation. And so these are things that the inspection would reveal. Now, also keep in mind that the inspector is not someone that's going to poke holes right through the house to make sure that the wiring is okay, or not faulty. But the inspector would use a visual inspection and other tools that may allow them to see through walls and calculate whatever metrics they need to calculate to produce their report. And so number one reason that makes a lot of sense is your own safety and the safety of your family, of course. Number two is to have no surprises. I had this file, it was in 2021. So really in the height of people being very aggressive in the market. And this woman that I work with, she did her due diligence and she did the inspection. For some reason in the basement, there was like a pile of clothes that was in a corner. So tip to the wise, move everything. When you do the inspection, you want to see behind cabinets. If you see something that's on the floor, move it around. Just make sure you visually inspect everything. And lo and behold, when she went to and of course that purchase was an as is, and as is meaning that you take the house just the way it is. And another mistake in that file is that my client had relied on the seller's lawyer's inspection about the house and didn't get her own. But anyways, and in the end, she ended up calling me to say, Mike, there's a tree trunk in the basement. And it looks like the tree trunk is connected to how the house is supported. It's like the foundation of this house. There's a trunk. What do I do? And as you can imagine, we didn't close on time because there was a back and forth between our office and the seller's office. Say, hey, there's a tree trunk. What do we do? Well, you should have known, and you had the time to do the walkthrough, et cetera, et cetera. And then, well, there was a pile of clothes. Well, that's not my problem. That's, buyers beware. You are in charge of making sure that there's no surprises. And so make sure that's something you do. No surprises for you if you do a good home inspection. Number three, and Ericka, let me know how am I doing in time, or if I need to be timed out, or just let me know, eh? Okay. It could be a good negotiation tool. You do the inspection and you see that there's crack, the typical crack in the basement or in the foundation. And then you know that to remediate that crack, it's going to cost $5,000. I'm just giving a random number. Well, that becomes a tool to say, well, my purchase price is $400,000, but I will need $5,000 to do the renovations about that crack in the basement. So maybe we should do an amendment to the purchase price, and then that can become a negotiation tool. Number four, protect your investment, right? You're going to put all that money into buying something that is hopefully the house of your dreams. So that inspection is also there to protect your investment. And number five, potential future cost. In the example that I gave you to the tree trunk, the liability or to remediate the removal of the trunk, it was something around $35,000. So if there's going to be some renovations needed in your house, you might want to know that before closing, not after. And just give me 1 second. Okay. And I'm just going to give you some miscellaneous tips that I think are useful if you're a first-time homebuyer. The first is the closing date. And I don't know if realtors, when they take their classes, they're all told to close on the 1st, on the 15th, or on the last day of the month. And those 3 dates are the craziest for the online system of registration, for banks, for lenders, and for brokers. So if you can, if there's a way for you to pick a date, please avoid the 1st of the month, or avoid like 15. I know it looks nice, it's the middle of the month, but it's also one of the craziest dates. The 1st, the 15th, the 30th, and the 31st of every month. That's where everybody wants to close, and it just gets very chaotic. I mean, we'll take care of your transaction. And Fridays, who's Marlon? Marlon is a brilliant man, and he's astute enough to know also that to avoid Fridays. And the reason why is that in the event that you're closing, for some reason, it doesn't happen on the day, you want to give yourself a buffer so that we can remediate to that, make the adjustment, and close the very next day. But if we don't close on Friday, the very next day available is the Monday. And then that can trigger some questions about damages and carrying costs, and especially if you're the buyer. If you're not able to close on the day of closing, and we need to make changes to your statement of adjustment, then it just complicates the file. So Marlon's 2 thumbs up for that, avoiding Fridays as well. Number 2, movers on closing day. So as your solicitor, we're trying to do our best to make sure that your transaction closes on time, but there's never any guarantee that we'll finish that by 11 a.m. sharp, right? And I like to tell my clients that you should anticipate a call from me in the late afternoon. That's usually when transaction closes. And I had this situation where clients were telling me, Mike, we really need you to close as early as possible. And I said, you know what? I got you. And I thought everything was okay. It was an A lender, no issue. A lender means like the TD and RBC and Scotiabank of the world. And so on our side, the buyer side, we sent all our documents, we wired the funds, it was 10 a.m., everything is good. And then we waited and we waited. We were waiting on the discharge statement, right? The confirmation from the seller side that they're going to discharge the mortgage that's on title. And as any good lawyer would tell you, you can never register a title if you don't have a discharge statement. And so we waited, and then it became phone calls. Mike, what's going on? I mean, we're ready. And then what they didn't tell me is that they had movers outside of the new home just waiting to unload, right, into the new home. And so it created a situation where they had to pay hundreds of dollars extra just for movers standing there. And I told them, had you mentioned that you had movers, I would have told you, no, cancel that and do it the next day. So if tip to the wise again, if you can avoid booking movers on your day of closing, because you never know the hiccups that can happen in any transaction. The next point, I was talking about the walkthrough earlier, and you want to make sure that if in your transaction you're buying the dryer, the laundry machine, the dishwasher, once you do the walkthrough, test those machines, push the buttons, see if they work, see if you hear a sound. Like, don't stay for the whole cycle, but touch everything to make sure it functions, because there's nothing more frustrating that you, after the transaction closes, then it's a back and forth about, my client's telling me that the dryer is not working, or the dishwasher is not working, or there was supposed to be drapes in the living room, they're not there. Make sure that everything that's conveyed with the transaction is there during your walkthrough. Number 4, property insurance. And that's part of the questionnaire that we send the clients in the beginning. Please get the property insured into, and the first loss pay being the bank. And what often happens is that, say your bank is on Montreal Road for those in Ottawa, and then you put that as the address. And then the lender says, nope, send it back, because the address that we want is the head office in Toronto. So although in our instructions to how to capture the insurance, it's in bold, italicized, and highlighted, 9 times out of 10, it's the wrong address. And so just another tip to make sure to read everything your lawyer sends you and really enter the address that we provide you for the property insurance. And number 5, potential future costs. Maybe that was on another slide that I didn't put property, but we're gonna skip that one. Okay. And then the importance of a lawyer, we can go to the other slide. Not try to toot my own horn, but lawyers are of importance because every closing is unique. And yes, every transaction has the same tenets, the same pillars, but every transaction has their unique life, their unique flavor. On this closing, there's leak in the basement that is discovered the day before. On that closing, it's about funding. And on the other one, it's about the statement of adjustment. So because every transaction is unique, you want your lawyer to be there with you every step of the way, to be able to advocate for you if need be, to be able to negotiate for you if need be, ask questions on your behalf, and explain or answer questions that you may have about your transaction. And I think that brings me to the end of my brief presentation. I hope you learned a thing or two from what I shared. And on that note, I'll just pass it over back to Ericka. Thank you. Keep your questions. You can put them in the chat. And then at the end of everything, we'll be able to have the back and forth Q&As. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Michel. That was a great presentation. So as you mentioned, we'll get to some questions at the end. I'll just do a brief presentation, talk to you a little bit about the mortgage side of things and what it is to work with a broker. And Michel was actually able to touch on a lot of great points, and I have some things that I'll touch on based on what he said as well, including, when you're talking about inspection and the market that we were in last year. So aside from foregoing home inspections, a lot of clients were foregoing financing conditions. And I love a financing condition, and we really missed those last year, and they are back this year. That's great. And so I'll talk a little bit about why that's a good thing. Can you all see my my deck?
Not yet. It looks like it's mine that is sort of zooming out. That's what I'm seeing.
Okay, I will get that on here.
Okay.
All right, how's that? Great. Everyone's muted. Go. All right. So for those who don't know me, hold on a second. There we go. For those who don't know me, my name is Ericka. I've been a mortgage agent since 2015. All right, we're gonna do that. I've been a mortgage broker since 2015. My formal title is mortgage agent. I'm a mom of 2 boys. I was born and raised here in Ottawa, so lived here my whole life, never left. So I certainly know the Ottawa market pretty well. When I first started in 2015, the landscape for mortgages was very different. It was like the wild, wild west, and anyone and everyone could get approved. And certainly over the last few years, the rules have tightened. And there's been a lot of changes. And so it's certainly more complicated now to get your mortgage. And so it's really important to try and have the right team together to try and get as much information you can before applying for your mortgage to put yourself in the best position. And so we'll talk about, what it is to get a pre-approval and what are the pieces that need to be in place to make that a seamless experience. So because I'm a mortgage agent, some people we can't formally use the title mortgage broker unless you have the designation, but what it means when you broker is that we have access to multiple lenders. So, it could be some of your big banks, for example, such as TD and Scotia. We also work with credit unions. We work with monoline lenders, which is simply banks that deal specifically in mortgage lending. And then we have access to so many different lenders in terms of alternative lending for clients who might have special files, I'll call them, might have, for example, maybe credit issues or special situations. If you're self-employed, you don't always have the most favorable experience at the bank. And so, sometimes we have self-employed clients who need a little bit more assistance, and we're able to help there. New to Canada, and then various different products. So we're not just there to help you with your purchase. We could be there to help you with a refinance if you're looking for assistance with debt consolidation, et cetera. So a little bit about me, that I've been a mortgage agent since 2015 here in Ottawa. And, I made a note that I bought my first home in 2011, and it was at a time where anything went and I had no idea what I was doing. And so I've learned a lot from, purchasing real estate myself. I've also rented in the last few years as well. So I've purchased property, I've been a renter, I've seen it all, so I can answer questions in regards to, the process that Michel talked about in terms of, working with your real estate agent and working with your lawyer. I've also purchased new builds as well, and so I'm familiar with the ins and outs of what it is to purchase new build property as well. We've talked a little bit about what it is to work with a broker. Some people will come to a mortgage broker for some of the situations that I mentioned, and other people, they might just be looking for diversity in terms of, getting an opinion on a better rate, for example. Some people like working with brokers because we're not really working banking hours. Typically, we're available, in the evenings and on the weekends. You can't generally text your banker if you need something, and so a lot of people enjoy the flexibility of working with a broker. When we're talking about mortgages, just understanding a little bit of the terminology. So I just put a few things here, but your amortization, it's the length of time over which your mortgage will be repaid. A typical amortization would be 25 years. That's where we start now. And the amortization is something that will affect how long your mortgage will be paid. It affects what your payments will be as well. And so when I had started originally, we had 35-year amortization, and then it was reduced to 25. So if minimum down payment now, is 5%, and so if you put down 5% minimum, then your amortization would be the 25 years. You can go up to 30 years in amortization, which sometimes some people like because it helps with cash flow, but you would have to be putting down a minimum 20% down payment. Your mortgage term, so the length of time that you're contracted to the mortgage over the amortization. So for example, the typical term that many first-time home buyers will go for is a 5-year term, but it could go anywhere from 1 to 10 years, for example, depending on what you choose and your situation. But in general, you will see a lot of 5-year terms. We have things like closing costs, so the costs that you have that are in addition to the purchase price of the home. So there's things that you need to consider. Some of the things could be an appraisal, for example. An appraisal is a valuation of the property that you're purchasing that a lender might require in order to advance you the funds. And then other things like your lawyer's fees, for example, and disbursements, which Michel had gone over. Your down payment is the amount of money, is the funds that you need to put down, just sort of kind of get your skin in the game. So minimum down payments, I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And then equity in the home is the difference between the price for which a home could be sold and then the amount registered against it. So for interest rates, we will talk about fixed rates versus a variable rate interest, and then a high ratio mortgage versus a conventional mortgage. The terminology is a little bit different now. There's a lot to cover, but I'll just sort of go over it quickly. So a fixed rate is a locked-in rate that won't increase for the term of the mortgage, whereas a variable rate mortgage interest rate can fluctuate based on the changes to the prime rate at the lending institution. And a high ratio mortgage versus a conventional mortgage. This terminal, it's a little bit outdated, but a high ratio mortgage would be a mortgage where you're putting down less than 20% versus a conventional mortgage where you're putting down 20% or more. And then we have open and closed mortgages. So generally, you're going to be placed in a closed mortgage. So it's fixed for a certain length of time, and you are in that term for that fixed period of time. Open mortgages, you generally don't see unless, for example, if you're up for renewal, you might get put into an open mortgage if you haven't, made the arrangements to transfer it to a new lender. Typically, people aren't in open mortgages because the interest rates are a lot higher than if you are in a closed mortgage. So, a pre-approval is probably one of the most important things that you can get, and something that is very important because it's going to give you an idea of your affordability, and it will allow you, for example, to if you want to lock in that rate with a lender, that's something that we're able to do as well, so that you can hold that rate for a period of 60 to 120 days, depending on the lender that we place you with. And then also, in terms of when you're actually going out there and shopping, your real estate agent will really love that, because it shows that you're a serious buyer. They know that you have had all of the important documents produced and checked. We've had your credit checked, and it just makes everything easier for everyone involved, knowing what you're going into, especially in terms of a negotiation. So a pre-approval is really something that's also going to protect you, because you don't want to get into a situation where you're placing bids on a property that you potentially can't afford. This was really important last year, for example, when we were talking a little bit about financing conditions. So what a financing condition is a clause in your agreement of purchase and sale where you would have been given a number of days to actually secure financing from a lender. And if in the event that you were not able to, you'd have the opportunity to walk away without a penalty, without losing your deposit, for example, because an agreement of purchase and sale, it is a legal contract. And so if you had foregone the financing condition, for example, and signed your agreement of purchase and sale and waived all of your conditions, then you've bought this property and you need to close on it. And so I think that's something, because we were in such a hot market last year, a lot of clients may not have understood. And so, sometimes, there would be situations where people will come to you and say that they put an offer on a property without realizing, and then got declined at their bank. And, and then this is, these are clients who had not come to us for a pre-approval beforehand. And so then you're either stuck trying to find more money, for example, to put towards the down payment, trying to get the mortgage. And so, a pre-approval will help you avoid these kinds of situations. So down payment requirements, your minimum down payment is 5% of the purchase price for properties that are less than $500,000. For homes between $500,000 to under $1 million, your minimum down payment is the 5% on the first $500,000 plus 10% on the remaining amount over $500,000. And for any homes over $1 million, your minimum down payment is 20%. And then there could be a sliding scale for any amounts above $1 million. And then all mortgages with down payments that are less than 20% are high ratio mortgages, and they require mortgage default insurance. And this amount is capped or added on to your mortgage balance. And so the mortgage default insurance, it's in some ways it's a protection for you, but it's really more a protection for the lender. But it's just, and so it's really interesting actually when you look at high ratio mortgages versus conventional mortgages. A lot of lenders, they like the security of the high ratio mortgage because of the default insurance that's attached to it. So there's the first-time homebuyer incentive, and then this income tax credit. I'm not going to talk too much about this first-time homebuyer incentive program, just because I have actually used this program a couple of times, but very early on when Ottawa's market wasn't so hot and prices were a little bit more affordable. This isn't a great program right now for Ottawa, specifically just because of the the rules for qualifying for it. A lot of people, most people, I haven't found anyone this year who qualified for this incentive, so I'm not going to get too much into that. Michelle had talked about land transfer tax and things. There's a $5,000 income tax credit that you can qualify for as a first-time home buyer. And this is something that your accountant will be able to assist you with at tax time. For first-time home buyers, one of the incentives that the Government of Canada has is that you have the Home Buyers Plan where you can withdraw up to $35,000 per person as a first-time home buyer from your RRSP savings to purchase or to build a home. And then you have 15 years to repay the amount that you withdraw from your RRSP. Otherwise, this is money that you get taxed on. And then other incentives is a land transfer tax refund, as Michelle had talked about. It's amount under 5,000, I believe the max was 4,000. So that's something that you have access to as a first-time home buyer. And this is just some features from Mortgage Alliance. There's a little app here that we have in terms of credit scores, property valuations, and mortgage calculators and current rates, etc. I will touch on briefly, for example, just the importance of monitoring your credit score. So when I was talking about the pre-approval portion, when you go online, sometimes you'll have these calculators, for example, or you have things that are called pre-qualification tools, but a pre-qualification is not a pre-approval. A pre-qualification tool will, maybe take some brief information about your income and maybe some information about your debts, for example, but it's not accurate. And so when you're working with your bank or with your mortgage broker, we're going to get a formal application from you upfront where we collect your personal information for the purpose of obtaining you a mortgage, and we'll collect things such as your employment documents, so a letter of employment, pay stubs. If you are a part-time worker, or if you work on commission and things, for example, we'll get your last 2 years T4s. If you're self-employed, we're going to be looking for things like your last 2 years T1 general, so your entire tax filing, so we can see a breakdown of all of your income. And alternatively, for if you're self-employed, for example, we might look at things like your last 6 months business bank statements. A lot of the times with self-employed clients, because of taxation issues, they are not always declaring all of the income that might help support an application for a mortgage, because banks will look at your 2-year average based off of your notice of assessment and T1s. And so for self-employed clients, we have access to alternative lending programs. And so we'll look at your business bank statements to calculate where your income, what your revenue is, and your expenses, and come up with a number that way for you. So if anyone has any questions about those things, you can certainly reach out about that. So that's really it for me. Maybe we'll open up the floor for any questions. And I'm going to.
Oh, Yuri.
Hey, Yuri.
Hey, how's it going?
Good. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. So I want to start off by saying thank you for the both of you for these just great information to have on both ends, coming from the lawyer side and also coming from yours as well. I had a question concerning closing date. Question from Michelle. So if you're not closing on like you mentioned how closing on a Friday wouldn't be the best thing. Like, is there a thing as well where you should probably be closing like more towards like like a Tuesday, Wednesday? Because I hear like if you end up closing, let's say like on a Monday, then you end up like being charged for interest on the weekend or something like that.
Charge on the interest on the weekend. So the idea of picking a day for the closing as earlier in the week is just to give you a buffer in the event that there wasn't the file wouldn't close on that day. And so in terms of interest, the choice of your date would not trigger any additional interest. So that basically the discharge statement that you would get from the seller's lawyer would contain the per diem up so the exact amount to discharge the mortgage on that day, right? And so the interest of carrying the cost if it doesn't close is if after that day you're still not closing and then the seller still has to pay interest on the mortgage that they're supposed to discharge. So otherwise there's no additional interest that you pay if you pick a Monday, but it's really if you don't close on that day that then interest might accrue.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thanks, Michelle. I think we had one question in the chat box. I'll just check and see if I can find it. Oh, Marlon told everyone to avoid Fridays. That's what it was. Okay. Does anyone else have any other questions?
I don't know how to.
One more for you, Yuri, or it's
Yeah,
just a
if I
legacy?
can,
Yeah, so I had one more though.
Sure.
So
Go
sorry
ahead.
about that. This it was something that I came across. So basically when it comes to defects in a property, so let's just say you went through the inspection and maybe the inspection didn't necessarily pick up everything, but the owner might have been aware of like certain things that like was wrong with the property but never mentioned it.
Mhm.
But then later on, I guess from living in the property, you're like, oh, this is a really big problem that wasn't picked up by the inspection. And also the owner itself didn't necessarily say anything about it. Is there like any recourse for that or?
So that then you would enter in the realm of litigation, where you would have to demonstrate that the previous owner knew or ought to have known about the issue and purposely withheld the information if it was with malice or any intent attached to it to make a claim for a hidden defect claim in litigation. And so that enters a realm that is outside of like a regular closing. But yeah, that's absolutely something that happens. Sometimes you get into the house and but then you have to make the connection that the biggest hurdle is to demonstrate whether or not the previous owner knew or ought to have known, right? If you're able to establish that, then you have a better chance of being successful in the claim, saying that you're owed damages because of a hidden defect. And to be sure, hidden defect is something that a reasonable, right, because lawyers like to use that word in every sauce, a reasonable inspector would use. And so a reasonable inspector would not poke holes into a wall to see if the wiring is faulty, but a reasonable inspector would visually and manually inspect the house to the best of the standards of the industry to be able to highlight if there's anything defective with the house. And so it's really that connection between knowledge and then going forward with the process of litigating the matter. But these are lengthy processes, and more often than not, they would end up being you don't hear a lot of this. There's obviously litigation, but it settles more than it goes all the way to a full-blown trial because trials are very expensive.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
You're on mute, Ericka.
Sorry, I was going to say any more questions, comments? I saw Patrick raise his hand. Go ahead.
Yeah, thanks first of all for having me on this panel as well. I'm also a mortgage agent, and I've known Michelle personally for quite some time. I just wanted to stress that during the home buying process, it's important to that the communication line is always available in between, let's say, for example, the broker and the lawyer, and as well as the realtor, just to make sure that everything goes out smoothly. So I've had a few deals where lawyers were not communicating well, and it was stressing the client as well. So this is something that needs to be stressed out as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a really great point, and thanks for being here. I really like being able to meet other people in our industry, and I think one of the reasons that I really enjoyed my interactions with Michel, and I'm sure Patrick can attest to that as well, is like I've seen that level of communication in a deal that we had been working on together, and so it's not always the case where your solicitor is communicating well with the client, especially if there's issues. And so, Michel, you were talking earlier about, well, for one thing, like one of the things that I wanted to point out to is like your lawyer is like, we're all, of course, an advocate for our client, but your lawyer is definitely that final piece of the puzzle looking after your best interests. And so it's really important, if there's anything that we may have missed, or that the client doesn't particularly understand, that the lawyer is providing enough information. Michel certainly does that. So
thank you. And funny enough, is the number one complaint at the Law Society about lawyers is about communication. My lawyer is not returning my call. My lawyer is not emailing back with me. And so I think we take pride in making sure that we function as a team with the realtor, with the broker. Our goal is just to see this close, and that's the philosophy we approach with every file.
And it's key also because it's such a big transaction. It's probably the biggest transaction that any client is going to have in their life. So the biggest thing is to try to relieve as much stress as possible, to just reassure them that this is going to close. And to do that, you need to communicate.
Absolutely. Patrick, have you seen anything interesting in the market recently, in terms of actually, and maybe Michel, maybe as well with new builds and things, for example? It was one of the things that I kind of wanted to touch on in terms of financing conditions as well. We're saying maybe with a new build now, maybe an inspection isn't as necessary, but we're seeing in the Ottawa market a lot of issues around new builds because prices were so high when people purchased them, versus now. So has anyone been running into anything like that?
So in terms of situation with a new build, there was I forget the builder's name, but they're located in Toronto, and they had listed a price for a purchase for this, I think it was a single for, I think 1.3. Obviously there was a drop because of the rise in the interest rates. So the price ended up going down to 900,000, and which is a huge drop. They submitted the appraisal. The appraisal came back around like 923, and the builder was able to honor the price so that they can close.
Amazing.
So, yeah, and the builder basically did that so they can keep a good reputation and draw more clients to come towards them. So it's a smart decision based on the builder side, but not too many builders are doing that at the moment.
Yes.
So clients are having to get a second mortgage, most of the time a private, at like high interest rates.
And just to piggyback on what you're saying, what I've seen also is an increase of inquiries about these exact situation. Hey, I signed last year, interest went up, and how do I get out of my APS, on my contract? And the simple answer is that a contract is not an invitation to negotiate, right? It's really a binding agreement between two parties. And in some markets, it seems that lawyers or people involved in the real estate world see contracts as an invitation to negotiate. And if I want to pull out, well, we can negotiate the terms, et cetera, et cetera. And so I'm seeing that an increase. And it's not just in the unsophisticated first-time home buyer. I've had mortgage brokers and realtors who are also investors asking, hey, can you review this APS? Is there any way for me to back out of this? And typically, even if it's a new build, you have a limited amount of time to have the APS reviewed by the lawyer for any inconsistencies or whatnot. And then, but they were way past those timelines. And the contracts are written in a way that if you back out of the deal, not only you forego your deposit, but because the deposit are by default non-refundable, but you expose yourself to potential damages, so that if the builder, in the case of a new build, ends up selling the house for less to someone else, then the difference between your the price in your APS and the new one becomes damages that the builder can go after because of your breach of contract. And so that's something that we're seeing a lot more. And I think something that we might see also in the near future is much more foreclosure situations, because of the way interest rates have gone up. It's put a stress on a lot of people that, you know, your house was worth, like you said, 1.3, and lo and behold, it's 400,000 less. What do you do? So those are things that we're seeing too.
And we're also seeing a couple assignment sales popping up, where like the original buyer allows another buyer to come and take over the sale. So those are coming up a lot. I haven't personally dealt with one, but they are on the market amongst the mortgage brokers.
Wonderful. Great. Any other questions, comments? Seems.
If I may,
Please go ahead.
Arnold Faro here.
Yeah.
I love the conversation. I don't know if I'm the only one. You guys are using a lot of wonderful terminology that some of us might not be very familiar with. But that's okay. So if I can ask, what are some of the, if I can narrow it down, what are the 3 things? For instance, my wife and I were looking to see how can we use our 2 properties to go ahead and move it over to a bigger property because the family's growing. So what are the 3 things that, 1, we should look out for, and 2, that we can do to better our chances in this hot market?
Right. I mean, there's certainly there's different ways to set up for purchasing other real estate, and certainly we could have a separate conversation about that. Some strategies that some clients like to use, for example, when they're trying to build their portfolio, is purchase the property. You have to live in it for a certain period of time, and then refinance the property to pull out equity from the property, and then you can use that as a down payment, because those are your funds. You can use that towards a down payment for another property, for example, and then they sort of and close on that property and rent out the property that you were originally living in, and sort of repeat that until it's not really possible to do that anymore. And then we have to look at other more creative ways to keep purchasing property. So I think some of the things that are really important to keep in mind when you're looking at multiple property situations is you need to make sure that your accounting is really solid. And so that's the time to really get the team together, because there are a lot of different issues when it comes to, for example, taxation and things. And those aren't necessarily things that I can advise on, and not necessarily things that your lawyer may be able to advise on. So you want to make sure that you have all of those pieces together, because there's certain reporting that you might need to do for rental income, for example. And so having a real estate accountant who can really talk to you about how to properly set up those things. And aside from your accountant, from your mortgage broker, and from your lawyer, your financial advisor as well.
Yep. I echo everything Ericka said. Bang on.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm happy to have a separate conversation.
Absolutely. That's also an invitation to have offline. So if you put when you register, we got your information. So I'm sure Ericka and you can link up offline to go in more than nitty-gritty.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Any other questions, comments? So I think That's it, and we're finishing at 7:45, so that's great. So thanks everyone for being on. We have the recording, and so we'll have that sent out to everyone as well. You have all of our contact information. Had everyone put your handles in as well if anyone wants to keep in touch with each other. We have a really awesome group of potential homeowners here, but we also have some amazing people from the industry, other mortgage brokers and real estate professionals, and of course Michelle, our amazing solicitor. So thank you all for being here, and let's keep in touch, and everyone have a great rest of the evening.
Thank you, Ericka.
Thank you, guys.
Everyone.
Thank you very
Enjoy.
much for your presentation, Ericka and Michelle.
Thank you
Pleasure.
very much.
Thank you.
care.
Bye-bye.
Bye.